Windows services. So a Windows service is another type of application that doesn't really have a user interface. And really think of it as a kind of a background process, something that's always running in the background. And a Windows service is considered a long-running executable, which really just think of it as a program that runs in the background that is always running and doing something and doesn't require user intervention. And some good examples of services out there, things like a scheduling system, where the service would constantly be pulling a database to find out if it needs to run a task or maybe send a notification or an alert. And in fact, a perfect candidate for this would be our Windows application that we built in our Windows application nugget, where we built a reminder system. And the problem with our Windows form application is the Windows application always has to be running. It has to be running on the user's desktop and sit in their tray and give them reminders on the desktop. And a better way to build that application would be to make it a Windows service that sends notification when the reminder time is up in the form of maybe a text message or an email or something along those lines of instant notification using a mobile device. So that's what we're going to look at in this nugget. I'm going to show you how to build Windows services, and we're going to actually transform the Windows application that we built, the reminder application, turn it into a Windows service that sends email notifications when those reminders are up. And just to mention a side note here, the Windows application would be a great front end to manipulate the data that the service would then use. So that wouldn't be entirely irrelevant. We could absolutely use that for data entry, and we could even use a web front end for data entry. And I'll give you a good, kind of a good slide that shows all the different applications and then the database and what the database is useful for here in a future nugget when we start talking about databases, just to kind of give you the bird's eye view of, we've looked at all these different kinds of applications: web applications, Windows applications, console applications, Windows services. And then when we get into the database world, we'll see that they all need a place to put this data. So, Windows applications and web applications can manipulate that data. Windows services can utilize that data. And we'll just put all the puzzle pieces that we've been learning about here together. All right, so let's jump into the outline for this nugget and talk a little bit more about Windows services. The first thing I want to do is just jump right in and have a little fun here creating a Windows service from scratch. And again, we'll use a lot of the code that we used inside of our Windows form application and our reminder application that we built inside of our Windows service. And then we'll take a look here just generally working with Windows services. Things like the event log is important. We need a way to write to log all this data, because what if something goes wrong? How are we going to know, since the service is always running in the background, maybe on a server somewhere? So we're going to fill up the event log with information, and if errors occur, we'll throw errors inside of the event log as well. So that's kind of they kind of go hand in hand. Windows services and event logs. Services are always writing to the event log because that's really, our window into how the service is functioning and what it's doing. And at the end here, we'll take a look at how to test and deploy Windows services. All right, let's head over to Nugget Lab and learn how to create some Windows services. So I'm going to minimize whiteboard. Double click on Nugget Lab here. We'll RDP over there. And when we're over here, let's hit the Start button and head up to Visual C# 2010 Express. Now, here's the thing. If we hit New Project, you're not going to see Windows Service inside of the Express editions of Visual Studio because the template isn't in here, unfortunately. So there is a workaround, however. What you can do is if you download the Visual Studio Full Trial Edition, it is in here. And the good news is you can actually use Windows services and work with them inside of Express if you have the project. And now what I did is I actually built our demo inside of the real version of Visual Studio 2010 and then brought it over here into Express so we can use it. So you'll still be able to use it here. If you access Nugget Lab here, you can open the project up. In fact, I'm going to open this project up by hitting Open Project and going into Projects and scrolling down to the bottom here. Here is WinService_development, and here's the solution. So I'm going to open it up, and here's what a Windows service looks like. So everything kind of looks the same here as far as the program .cs goes, our launcher in here. But we've got these two components. And in fact, if you are to create a Windows service from scratch in Visual Studio, you won't get the project installer. You'll only get the actual base component here. And I renamed it to Reminder Service, but it would just say service.cs or Windows Service.cs. So what you do here is there's a link on this that says add installer. When you hit that, it adds this file right here. And we're going to go over this file with project installer. Really, it's just allows us to determine the properties on the service itself. So we'll go over this plenty when we get there. But really what we're going to be concerned with as soon as we build the service or get the service project going here is coding it up. So all I did was add our reminder object here, our reminder class. And you can see it's the same as we've been working with up to this point. Nothing added to it, although we will be adding email address in here because we need the email address of the individual that this alert is going to go to. This reminder is going to go to, right? So we'll add that in a minute. But first, let's go into the service itself. And when you double-click on it, you're going to get this, Atom from the toolbox. But really, what we want to do is just click here to switch to code view, and you get these on start and on stop events wired in by default. And what these are is when a service starts, this is going to run. When it stops, this is going to run. And you can add extra events here for on pause, and there's a few other ones here that relate to Windows services. But just to show you, let's head in and take a look at the services snap-in, the MMC snap-in. So if we hit start and head over to administrative tools, here is the services snap-in. Right? So inside of this little applet, here are all the Windows services running on this machine. If we scroll down here, you'll see there's quite a bit of them. So we've got SQL Server installed on this virtual machine, and you can see here SQL Server Agent, which is what SQL Server, which is Microsoft's database platform, uses to execute jobs and tasks. And here's actual SQL Server itself, the database platform. You can see it started, it's always running, managing the data inside of it. And if we scroll up a little bit here, you can see there's also Microsoft.NET Framework stuff, and lots of other stuff relating to Windows, and there's always good descriptions on them. But you can see here, you can start, stop, pause, and resume a Windows service. And if we click on one of these, and I'm just going to go down to the SQL Server one here. Here we go. If we click on this, you can see here's all the information about the service, what the actual executable is to the service, and any command line parameters that when it starts up get passed to it. The startup type, and then again, start, stop, pause, resume. Security for what all the code under the service, what account it runs under. So if it accesses any network resources, we got to make sure that the account has the sufficient privileges to do so. And then recovery, if it fails, what do you want to do? All this good stuff, and the dependencies. What else relies on the service? So this is a service, just the properties that go around this long-running process. And this is really what the installer is going to do when we get there, is provide all this information. How the startup type, the description, so we can fill all this stuff in when we get to the installer. But this is a service, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to create a service, give it a name, give it a description, all this stuff, and put it inside here so it's constantly running and sending reminders. So we got to code this up. And I'm going to go ahead and just minimize our services app, but we'll be back in there plenty and come back here. And I really just wanted to show you that. So when the service starts, the code in here is going to run, and check it out, just like command line application, you can pass arguments like you saw in the SQL Server service there. We can do the same thing here and parse those arguments out, and then when it stops, we can do the same thing. As far as running code when the service stops, if we need to do any cleanup or release any resources back to the operating system, close database connections and whatnot, and we'll take a look at how to work with this on stop event. But the first thing we need to do here is get the core of our service set up. And a lot of services just run on timers. And if you remember a timer, we've looked at them a few times in this series so far. A timer just allows us to run, basically put code underneath it, attach a timer to its elapsed event. We would put code in that elapsed event, and when the interval was up, which was in milliseconds, so 1,000 milliseconds is a second, 5,000 milliseconds, 5 seconds, when that interval was up, it would run the code. So every 5 seconds it could run code. And that's what we're going to do here. We're going to create a timer in code, and every 5 seconds it'll check that code, look and see if there's any reminders available to basically do a comparison against, run our reminder logic against, to do a date-time comparison to see if it's within the alert time, and if it is, it'll send a reminder. So that's what we're going to do. The only difference here is that in a service, we don't have the luxury of all these controls that we did in a Windows Form application, where we could just drag the timer object onto the form, which would give it into our tray area down here, and we could just set those properties manually. Well, we need to do this all in code. So what we need to do is access timers and pull them in here with a using statement. So we'll do a using system.timers, and that'll give us access to the timers class. So what we need to do here is just declare a module level variable that's a timer, so we can access this timer throughout all the code in our service. So I'm just going to say timer underscore, timer will be the name of it, timer is the type, And now we can start working with it. And what we're going to do here is in the onStart method, anytime that the service is started, we're going to reconfigure the timer. So let's just first instantiate it. So anytime someone stops it, it's going to destroy the timer. And anytime they start it, it's going to recreate the timer. So we'll do an underscore timer equals a new timer. And now we can start working with it. And the first thing I really like to do here, if you're going to work with manually tying up your event handlers, is do that. Tie up any event handlers you need to. So what we're going to do here is right under here, we're going to do an underscore timer dot elapsed event. See how this is an event here? We're going to set this plus equals to a new elapsed event handler. And what this is going to expect is a method in here. We're going to pass an actual method to this elapsed event handler, and that'll essentially hook up our own method right into the elapsed event of the timer. So we need to go down here and declare that method, and we're just going to do a how about a private void here, and we're just going to call this, how about name of the timer, so underscore timer underscore elapsed. So it matches what it is here. It doesn't have to match this exactly, but it's good for consistency purposes, because really this is the name of this we're going to pass into our event handler here. And what's going to take here is just going to take an object as the sender, and then the elapsed event args as our E here. And that's it, because this is the type of signature that this expects. And you can see that here as you open it up. See this? Object, elapsed event args? That's what it's expecting. So that's how you can kind of see the signatures and match it up. So now that's all we need to do is take this, paste it in here. If our copy and paste works here. There we go. Add our semicolon at the end. And there we go. We're hooked up. So now when our elapsed event occurs, it's going to fire the code down here. And the code that we're going to put in here is the code that we're going to strip out of our Windows Forms project that we built that was underneath that timer, which just loops through all of the reminders and does the date comparison and then sends the request. What we did, though, is we had it as a Windows Form application that ran in the tray, and it popped up a balloon on their desktop. Well, we're going to turn this into an email that actually sends an email to the individual's email address that has the reminder inside of it. So that'll be kind of neat. But that's all set up. Now let's configure the rest of our timer here. Let's just do an underscore timer dot interval equals 5,000. So 5,000 milliseconds once again is 5 seconds. So that'll basically mean that every time this interval is hit, every 5 seconds, it's going to run the code in our elapsed event. The next thing we want to do here is just enable the timer. So we can do an underscore timer dot enabled equals true. And then finally an underscore timer dot start. This will start the timer. So as soon as I hit start on the service, it's going to create the timer, hook up our event handler, set the interval, enable it, and start it. And boom, it'll be running right off the bat. And now here's something we could use the onStop event for. We could just simply stop the timer, underscore timer dot stop, just to make sure that it stops when they hit stop. That's good programming practice there. So we can do that. And now the timer is set up. Really, the only thing we need to do with our timer is really the meat and potatoes of our code here, which is our elapsed event, which is going to contain all the logic that we need for our reminder system. Now, before we write this code inside of here, I just want to set up some more things. We need to expand our reminder class so it can handle email address, and then we need to get some reminders to work with in here. So let's do this. Let's head over to our reminder class, and the first thing let's do in here is just add a string so we can keep track of email address. And we'll add a get and a set into here, and that's it. So that's all we need to do to this class to handle email addresses. Just add a property in here that we can work with. All right, so that's good. Let's close out of that. And now the next thing we need to do is just add some reminders in here so our service has some reminders to work with. I'm going to paste a routine in here called void create reminders. And this is just going to create 2 reminders, and I'll go over them in a second, but we do need a list to store these reminders in, because this is what the timer is going to loop through, is that list of reminders. So very similar to the Windows Forms application that we built a little bit ago. And so here we're just going to create a list of our reminder object, like so, and we'll call this underscore reminders equals a new list of those reminder objects, and that looks good. So we've got our module level reminders list that's just going to store a collection of all these reminders inside of it. So we have 2 reminders. We've got a reminder called work it that's going to say do some work, and it's going to happen in 3 minutes from now. We just do a date time.now to add 3 minutes. It's going to remind us 1 minute before that. We're enabling it, and then we're setting the email address equal to my Nugget email here, garth@nuggetlab.com, and then we'll add it to our reminders list. And then we'll add another one down here, get the kids. And this is the same thing, only it'll add it 20 minutes out. It'll alert us 15 minutes prior to it with a note. This one has a note, this one doesn't. Also enabled, also sent to myself, and then we also add it to our reminder. So we've got 2 reminders to work with inside of our list here. And really the next thing we need to do is just write the bulk of our logic. So the first thing we're going to do inside of our elapsed event is we're just going to do a timer.enabled equals false. So let's disable the timer. And this is just kind of a preventative measure here because we're going to send email through Gmail using Google's mail servers as our kind of our SMTP relay. So because we're doing that, we're going to be waiting on Google, and this could take a little bit of time to do that. And the timer, could kick off a few times while we're waiting. And this code could step on itself, and that would cause all kinds of errors in our service. So it's good practice here to just disable the timer when we get into the elapsed event, and then re-enable it as we're leaving the elapsed event. All right, so that's the first line of code. The next thing I'm just going to paste some code in here so you don't have to watch me type all this stuff out. But I just ripped this right out of our Windows Forms project from a previous nugget, and it's just our loop that loops through all the reminders in our list, and then creates a time span, and then as long as the reminder hasn't already been done and is enabled, it's going to do that time comparison. So before, in our previous project, if all of this stuff matched and all these ifs evaluated to true, this is where we would basically create our notify icon and pop that bubble up that gave them a notification. Only here is where we're going to send email notification. So let's build this part of the service, the email part. And this is something that may be totally irrelevant as far as software fundamentals go, but the cool factor in this is really high, and the useful factor in this is through the roof, because I guarantee you if you stick with it as a programmer, you'll be doing lots of this kind of email stuff and working with emails and sending emails inside of everything from web applications to Windows applications to Windows services. It's a very handy thing. Everybody likes email notifications these days. Even if you become a database administrator in a SQL Server, this stuff you can do inside of something called integration services. So I'm going to show you how to do it. And the first thing we need to do is get access to the mail classes. So if we scroll back up to the top here, let's do a using system.net.mail. This contains the classes we need to configure and work with a mail host, create mail messages, and send them through that mail host. So once we do that, let's head down here underneath the timer, and let's create just another module level variable called SMTP client. And we'll just call this _ SMTP. That's how we'll access it. And we're going to instantiate this also inside of our onStart event. Let's just put this right above the timer here. So we're going to do an _ SMTP equals new SMTP client. So you can see the first parameter here when we instantiate our SMTP client is going to be host. Our second version here is host and port. Now we're going to use Gmail, so we need to do smtp.gmail.com as our host, and our port needs to be 587. And now I'm using Gmail just to make it easy. We could easily set up, I shouldn't say easily, we could set up an SMTP server here in IIS, and then we could use localhost as our host name, and then port 25, which is a standard SMTP port. But the reason I'm kind of taking that out of the loop, because that would just be something else we would have to set up and show you how to set up, and then we'll add another layer of complexity in here. So I'm just going to use Gmail to do this. But keep in mind, you can absolutely use your own email servers or any SMTP server, really, as long as you have access to it. But the other thing we need to do here, if you're going to use Gmail, and by the way, if you do have a Gmail account and you want to do this on your own, you certainly can. Just go into your Gmail account, hit settings, and on the pop mail tab, there's instructions on what host to use, what port to use, and how to connect and use Gmail as an SMTP server like we're doing here. So the only other things we need to do here is we need to set up secure communications, SSL. So we need to enable SSL by setting it to true on the client here. And then because we're using Gmail, it also requires an account and a password. So we can do an smtp.credentials equals new system.net.network credential. And I'm going to use my Nugget Lab account here, Garth at nuggetlab.com, and I'll type my password in when you're not looking, because you don't need to know my password. So that's it. We've got our SMTP client set up, so now we can send emails through this client. The next thing we need to do is actually set up the mail message itself. And this is easy enough to do. We have a mail object that we can work with in here. So what I'm going to do is call mail message. That's going to be the name of the class. We'll just call this mail equals a new mail message. And now we can start configuring our mail. So check this out. Mail dot, how about we set up the from, right? From equals a new mail address. And we're just going to type this in static. We can spoof this, kind of put whatever we want. How about we call this reminders@nuggetlab.com. So this is what it'll look like it came from, even though this email doesn't exist. So if someone tries to reply to it, they'll they'll get a bounce back. And then let's add our mail.to, and we have to do a .add here because we could have multiple twos. And what are we going to add in here? Well, let's add a new mail address. And what is this address going to be? You guessed it, our .email address, which is the email address stored inside of the reminders that we have set up down here. So it'll extract this right out of our class and use that as the to address. And we forgot one more parenthesis there. Now the only other thing we have left to do is set up a subject, a body, and then send the email. So let's do a mail.subject equals, and let's just do a string.format here. Get this set up. And what do we want our subject to be? How about something that they'll definitely know is a reminder? So we'll do something kind of cool like this. There we go. And then inside where that 0 placeholder is, that's just going to be our dot name. So the name of the reminder. There we go. That looks good. And of course, case sensitivity here. There we go. So that's going to come over as our reminder name. That's going to what the subject is going to look like. So they'll definitely recognize that as a reminder from our service. And finally here, the body. Let's just do a mail.body equals, let's do another string.format. Just set this up appropriately here. And how about this is going to say 0 is due in 1 minutes. We do something like that. There we go. So our 0 placeholder is going to be our dot name again, and then we'll do an r dot alert time. All right, so that'll just basically say reminder is due in X number of minutes, X being whatever the alert time is set up, the notification alert prior to the actual reminder itself. So that's it. The mail message is set up. The next thing we need to do is just send it. And this is where we use our SMTP object that we created above with the host and all that and the password. And there's a send method on it. And inside the send method, you got it, we just pass our mail message. And that'll send it. And then a smart thing to do here too, after the send, is mark this as complete so it doesn't happen anymore. So we'll do an r.isComplete equals true. So as our service continues to loop through it, it won't hit this reminder again. Alright, and finally here, after our loop, we need to re-enable our timer. So let's do a timer.enabled equals true. Alright, that was a lot of work, right? So, but we're not done. We've got one more thing to do here inside of our service, and that is we need logging capabilities. That's right, we need to write to the Windows event log because we need to know if things go wrong inside of our service, right? And it's also good to write on stops and on starts out so we know if the service started successfully and if it stopped successfully. So, if you want to work with the Windows event log, it's easy to do. It's already we've already got access to it from within our service here. So because we've got system.diagnostics, see this? This namespace right here has an event log inside of it. So that's nice of the Windows Services project template to give that to us right out of the box here. So let's just create an event log. There it is. And we'll just call this, how about event log? There we go. Keep it simple, right? And there we go. So now we've got an event log set up. And what we're going to do in this one is we're going to set this up inside of our actual initialized component, inside of the constructor for the service here. And so let's write some code in here. And what we need to do first is create an event source. And this is just something that basically identifies our service. So what we're going to do is write an if statement around here because we only want to create this once. This can only be created once. We have to check to make sure it doesn't exist. So we're going to do an if not event log dot source exists. And we're going to pass in the name of our source. And let's just call this reminder service. There we go. So if that doesn't exist, then we're going to do an event log dot create source. Create event source. And pass in our reminder service. Oop. We need to keep all these names the exact same. And where are we going to create this? What's the name of the log we want to put this in? And we can make our own, but let's just throw this in the application log for now. All right, and I'll explain that when we get there, where that's going. So that'll configure our log. Now we need to actually create the event log itself to work with here in code. So this is where we'll do an event log, underscore event log equals a new event log. All right, that'll give us an event log to work with. And now we just do an event log dot source. Forgot the T there. Event log. Whoa, forgot a lot of things. There we go. Event log dot source equals, you got it, reminder service. That'll hook us in to the existing one that we just created above there. And now we just need to do the same thing here. Underscore event log dot log equals application. All right, so essentially we're just tying our event log that we have above here that we're going to be working with in our service to the one that we just created up here. So this is going to create it if it doesn't exist. That way, you know, if the service starts and stops all over the place, then when the constructor gets fired off here, it's not going to keep creating these reminder service events sources inside of the application log. All right, so that'll basically configure it. Now we just need to use it. And what I like to do again here is in the on start, I like to just write an entry to let them know that the service started. So we can do an underscore event log dot write entry. And what are we going to write in here? Let's just say, how about service started? Something simple here. You can also denote what type this is. If it's an error, failure, failure audit, success audit, those are the security ones. Error, information, or warning. This is going to be just an informational one. So we can do that. And I'm going to copy this because we're going to use it down here at the bottom of our on stop event. There we go. And then we'll just change this to stopped. And that's also going to be an informational, kind of an informative type of icon inside of the event log. And finally, we need one more event, and that is going to be an error event. And this is a good one to put inside of our elapsed routine here, because this is the one that's going to get fired off the most. This is where 90% of the work inside of our service is going to be done. So let's put a try catch inside of here. And let's just do a try. There's going to be the first one. We're going to wrap all of this code inside of a try. So we're going to try that. We're going to put a catch underneath it. And what are we going to catch? Well, just a general exception. We'll call that EX. And then down here we'll put a finally, because we always want that timer to get enabled again. So that's a perfect spot for our house cleaning code to re-enable our timer down there as well. And then in our catch is where we're going to write this information out. And what we're going to write out here, let's just write out the whole error. So let's just do a ex.toString. And instead of this one being an information entry type, this is going to be an error. All right, so it's good to put error handling code around, especially inside of a service here, because if something were to go wrong inside of our timer, we could crash the service. I mean, at the worst, someone's not going to get the reminders, but geez, if the service crashed, nobody's going to get, no reminders are going to go out. So good to do this kind of stuff. And we're kind of covering our own butts here too, because now if something goes wrong, we can check the Windows event log for errors, and we'll be able to track down what's happening and hopefully fix it as soon as possible. All right, now I can say, whew, we wrote all that code, and it wasn't that bad. I mean, really, there's just a couple of major components to it. We've got the service itself, the on-start and on-stop, which we just basically use to set up our timer, set up our SMTP client, and also configure our log. And those are the three main components right there. And then obviously we've got our reminder system down here that just does some checks and then sends mail. So the next big thing here, since we have the service built, is going to be to set up our installer and then get the service installed and ready for us to test at least. So the best way to do this here is again, if you don't have the installer, there'll be a link down here on the service that says add installer, and if you click it, it'll add this project installer, which will give us these two components here that we can configure. And these just configure that user interface I showed you at the beginning of this nugget. And in fact, I've already filled them out here for our service installer. This is just going to have the description. So this is the description that we're going to see right here. All right, simple, right? And then also down here you have the service name. This is just kind of the system name that if you double click on a service, you're going to see the actual service name here. So you got that. And then finally here you have your startup type. Manual, automatic, or disabled. We'll leave ours at manual. That's the default. So this is really just the kind of the metadata, the information about your service. The installer itself has an important one here. the account that it runs under. So if you choose user, when the user runs the setup to install the service, it's going to prompt them to supply their own credentials. So I'm just going to turn this to local system, so it runs under the local system account. We're not going outside and accessing any resources that we don't need, on our network. Sure, we're going out to Google, but we've already supplied those credentials inside of the service. But we're not accessing anything on the network, so we can just keep this at local system. All right, so it's finally time to install the service. And now, when you're in the development environment, and there's going to be a lot of, you want to test the service out, and then go back and make changes to the code and retest it out. We have an easy way to do it. We have something called install util that comes with Microsoft.net that Microsoft gave us developers that makes it a little bit easier to deal with installing, making changes and updates to the exe, and reinstalling and all that fun stuff. It's called install util, and now it's much easier with the full version of Visual Studio because, again, we have the Visual Studio command prompt available to us where we could just fire that up, type in install util, passing the path to our exe output from our service here, and that would use these installers and install it inside of our services applet. Now, because we're on Visual Studio Express here, we don't have the luxury of the Visual Studio command prompt, so bear with me. We have to do this manually, but it's really not that bad. If we head down to Start and open up a command prompt, all right, we've got our command prompt open. The next thing we're going to do is show you where install util is. So I'm going to head to Start. I'm just going to type in C: here, get us into the file system. And if you go into the Windows directory and scroll down until you see Microsoft.net Framework, or Framework 64 if you're on 64-bit, and your version that you're working in here, ours, we're working in 4.0 here, so we'll click on 4.0. Inside of this directory, I'm just going to start typing in install, there it is, install-util.exe. If I'm just going to drag this over to our command window, there we go. So now we've got install util available to us, and now the rest of the work is really just going to be passing in the path to our exe. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on this, and I'm going to build it just to make sure that it's built here. And here's our project folder, so I'm going to copy this, start, paste it in here to our search area, bin, we're on the release version here, and now if I just drag this into here like so, oh, we needed a space there, didn't we? Alright, let's get a space there. There we go. And I hit enter, check it out. So it gave us some information there. The transaction install has completed. This is what you want. You want to see successfully. That's good news right there. Everything went well. Nothing's wrong with our service. So now if we go back to the services applet and hit the refresh button, hopefully somewhere in here we will see, hey, there it is, our reminder service. So if you open this up, here's the description I put on it. You can see there's the system name we gave it. There's the display name. And everything else is the way it is. We're using the local system account. Setup is manual. So now all we really need to do is start the service and hope that we get some emails. So we're finally ready to install this service. And what we're going to do here, and what's really nice for developers, is Microsoft gave us something called the install util that comes with Visual Studio that makes it really easy to install a service. And then if we need to make changes to it, because we'll constantly be going back and fixing bugs and rewriting our code, we just simply need to stop the service, rebuild the project, which will rebuild the outputs in the executable, and then restart the service. So it's very easy. Is we really just need to do an install util to get the service in there. Then we can just rebuild all day long our changes, and then when it comes time to get it off of our system, we can just do an install util with the /u switch, which will uninstall it. Now, when it comes time to deploy this to production, it's very easy to create a setup package in the full version of Visual Studio that you will just add your project into. It'll just extract what it needs out of here, and it'll create a nice MSI setup package that the user can use a wizard to step through and install the service on their system. All right, but let me show you how to do this. It's a little more complex here with the Express Edition because we do not have the Visual Studio command prompt. If you had that, it'd be very easy, but we don't have that. It doesn't come with Visual Studio Express, but again, we still have access to these tools. They're still installed. We just have to do it the manual way. So let's head down to Start and fire up the command prompt. And once we have this up, we need to find install util. So let's go to Start. I'm just going to start going through the hard drive just to show you where it is. If you go to your installation directory, or your root directory here of Windows, so C:\Windows for this one, and then head down to Microsoft.net, and then Framework. Here are all the versions of .NET installed in the system. We're using 4.0, so if we do v4.0, inside of here are all the tools, and all we need to do is just find install util. So I'm going to start typing in install. Oop, went too fast there. Install util. There it is. And we can just drag this right into our command prompt like so. And now we have it. Now let's put a space there. And now we just need to rebuild our project. So I'm going to right click on our project to build it, make sure that we get the most recent version. And see this project folder? I'm just going to go right into this project folder. So I'm going to start, search for that, go into our bin directory, release directory, and here is the exe for our project. So I'm just going to drag this right in to here, because that's what install util takes, is just a path to your exe. And if we hit enter, it's going to give us some information about it. And this is good. Once you see successfully down here, that means the service is installed. So if we minimize everything here and open up our services applet and hit refresh, hopefully we scroll down here, we should see a reminder service. There it is. There's our reminder service. There's our description. If we double click on this, you can see here's a system name, here's a display name, here's a reminder I set to it. We have a startup type of manual, here's the path to the exe, and now we can start it. Let's do it. I'm going to hit start here. And that's a good sign if it started. We didn't get any errors that popped up, so everything looks good on the service. And what we can do to see if it actually started is, you guessed it, head over to the event viewer. So let's head down to start, go to administrative tools, and open up the event viewer. So if we head down to Windows Logs, Application, check it out. There it is. And now we've got two in here, and one of them is actually a system one. In fact, here's ours, because we just said service started. That's exactly what we have right here, service started. And the second one here is actually a system one generated by the Service Control Manager. Service started successfully. They have these built in, automatically for every service. But this one is definitely ours. The service is started, and now we're just waiting for it to, if it succeeds, hopefully we'll get an email. If it doesn't, we'll get an error generated inside of here, and it should succeed. Being optimistic here, because we did quite a bit of coding, and the more code you do, of course, the more chance you have something going wrong. But let me just minimize this stuff, and let's head over to Nugget Lab, my email account here. I'm just going to go to mail.nuggetlab.com, type in my stuff, and do we have one yet? Oh, we don't know, actually. Here we go. We've got to enable everything. Okay, not yet. So I've got nothing in my email at the moment. I'm going to give this a sec. I'm going to put you on hold, and as soon as this email hits the box here, I'll start the video back up. Alright, so I'm back, and I have no email. and you're going to laugh at me, but I made a really, really silly mistake. I was going to sit here all night long until an email came in before I said, something's going wrong. Maybe I should look at the code. And besides, this will give me a good opportunity to show you how we can update the service. But so this was going and going and going. I'm sitting here going back and forth and going into the event viewer and saying, what the heck is going on? Let me just clear out this event here. So what I did is I just ended up, well, I'm going to do it now. I'm going to stop the service. And by the way, that should, if we refresh this log here, yep, give us some stop events in here. So I'm just going to clear this out. All right, so we've got a fresh log. But what I didn't do when we were programming, silly me, is see this create reminders? We forgot to call this. So there were never any reminders in the system, and I would have been staring at that email until I fell asleep. So what we need to do is create these reminders when it starts up. There we go. Now we've got some reminders in here. Now let's rebuild this. And this is all you need to do. As long as the service is stopped, which it is, and we did that a little quick for you, but you can see we're stopped. We can just rebuild the service. Right click on the project, hit rebuild, and now we can just restart the service. The exe has been updated. Everything is great. So you can see how easy it is to develop services once you have it installed. Now, if you made any changes to the service data itself and you wanted this stuff to update, then you would need to uninstall and then reinstall the service. And that's really easy to do. That would just obviously kick off the installers again. But all you need to do is back in here, add a /u in between the exe and the path. So adding that U switch would just get it back out of here. And I'll show you how to do that here when we get there. But that now it should work. So if I hit refresh, all right, we've got those in there. Good. Now we can go wait in Nugget Lab. And I'm sorry, but I will be back again. Let me put you on hold one more time. Hey, check it out. I'm back. And we have a reminder. So, one thing I can definitely tell you about programming, and once you get some experience with it, is the minute you get that feeling something isn't working, 9 times out of 10 something isn't working. so I just had that feeling before that, and I said, you know what, something isn't working here. And then I went and looked, and I just realized we forgot to add our create reminders routine. But check it out, it's working this time because we've got an email here, and if I click on it, there it is. Do some work is due in 1 minute, sent to myself, and looks pretty neat, right? That's kind of neat. So to me, and if we hit reply here, it actually came from me as well because for some reason the from didn't kick through, but that's okay. It worked, right? We've got our reminder. It emailed it to us from our service, and that's just cool stuff. Services are fun to build. So I showed you quite a bit there. Let me just do one more thing here. Let me actually go under our services. Let's stop our service, and I just wanted to show you that the errors work here. Let's put an error in here. Let's just change smtp.gmail.com to smt.gmail.com. So we'll take the P off of there. So this host doesn't exist. So when it tries to send the email here, we're going to get an error. So we stop the service. I'm just going to rebuild this, head down to services, restart it. If we look in the event viewer one more time, you can see we've got all of our stop and starts in here. I'm just going to let's clear this log. Get it out of there. Alright, so now we should get an error in here when it comes time to send that email. So I'm going to put you on hold. Last time, I promise. It's not. I put you more on hold than a tech support call to Microsoft right now, right? So give me 1 second. I'll be right back. Hey, I'm back, and check it out. We have an error in our log. And what went wrong? Well, since we outputted the entire exception to our event log here, we get it all. Failure sending email. The remote name could not be resolved. smt.gmail.com. So it gave us pretty good error message in this case, and we could put our easy fix in there. We could stop our service, go back into the code, fix it, put our P back in there, save it, rebuild it, and now we could restart the service and everything would be back to normal. Alright, now really the last thing I want to show you here is just how to clean up and uninstall the service. Very simple to do. Back into our command prompt, I'm just going to hit up here to give us our most recent command. I'm just going to go in between these two commands and just put us /u. As I mentioned earlier, this will uninstall it for us. So if we put the U switch in there, hit enter, it's just going to let us know that it's going to remove the event log source reminder service. So that's kind of handy that it recognized that and removed it. And then it removed the service. So if we go back into the service applet, it's still here, but if we hit refresh, check it out, it's gone. So we've cleaned up after ourselves. Alright, so in this CBC Nugget, we took a big look here at Windows services. We started off with just what they are. They're long-running processes. They're applications that run in the background that don't require user intervention, and they're always on. Think of them as kind of they're always on, and they're usually run on servers. So after we got familiar with what they are, I took you through a huge demo here, starting really from scratch and showing you how to build a Windows service. All the core components, such as a timer. Services need a way to go and search and hunt for conditions and data, and if they're true, do something. So we just kind of evolved our reminder system, took it out of a Windows Form application, turned it into an automated Windows service that could always be running and sending out these reminders. And I wanted to show you some neat things in there, like creating and sending emails, writing to the event log. Those are all common things you usually do inside of services, and just get you familiar with how to build a Windows service, how to install it, how to work and test with it, debug it, and just generally have fun doing so. So I hope this has been informative for you, and I thank you for viewing.